following the first venue of this touring exhibition at the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth. It's really great to see how everything came together here in Albuquerque, and I really love the installation here, and it has been a really great collaboration, so thank you very much, Andrew Connors, and to the whole team at the Albuquerque Museum. In my lecture today, I would like to give you an introduction to the history of our collection, which is deeply reflected in our exhibition here at the Albuquerque Museum. The exhibition allows us to look back on the first half of the 20th century, on a turbulent historical period in Germany and in Europe. The collection of the Nationalgalerie, the National Gallery, is more linked with the history of that time than almost any other in Germany. Important historical events have been associated with Berlin, which explains why art with a strong focus on political and social processes has been collected in the city. So, beyond a pure history of aesthetics, art and politics are closely intertwined in our collection, and this is why we titled the exhibition Modern Art and Politics in Germany. We are presenting around 70 major artworks in the show, and some highlights are here on the first slide. These works were created between 1910 and 1945 by artists who were part of the avant-garde movements that pioneered formal innovations. However, there was no continuous sequence of styles, but rather an overlap in time of diverse new movements like expressionism, new objectivity, or abstraction. So we are introducing each style in different sections of the exhibition. The first half of the 20th century was an era characterized by extreme contrasts and opposites, both in art and in society. On the one hand, this period marked the dawn of modernity, and innovations such as the automobile and airplane, the telephone and radio, even the subway, led to radical changes in everyday life, especially in cities like in Berlin. And this modern age was accompanied by various progressive movements, among them the introduction of women's suffrage in Germany in 1918. The painting by Kurt Günther, who depicted the modern radio listener, or the painting by Christian Schad, whose famous Sonja is an icon of the emancipated new woman, illustrate this modern move, this tremendous awakening at the beginning of the 20th century. So I talked about this, Sonja, by Christian Schad, and this painting by Kurt Günther, which is showing the modern radio listener at home. On the one hand, this era was also marked by grave social and political crises. On the other hand, you must be aware that these works were created in the context of three completely different political systems. Till 1918, the German Empire existed, in which modern art was rejected, and the desire for freedom was directed against the conservative monarchy under Kaiser Wilhelm II. Then, in 1919, the first German democracy was formed, which was called the Weimar Republic, and in which modernism was accepted as progressive. And finally, Germany had to experience the dictatorship of National Socialism from 1933 to 1945, in which modern art was defamed as degenerate. The whole period was also defined by successive traumas, the First and the Second World War, and the breakdown of civilization in the Holocaust. George Grosz foresaw a lot of it already in his painting, Pillars of Society, created in 1926. And he is focusing on the political crisis, on corruption, on the abuse of power. In the background, you see Germany already burning, above there, 13 years before World War II began. Against the backdrop of this rapidly changing political landscape, Berlin was a vibrant center of the artistic avant-garde, which wanted to change not only art but also society. Art was, in fact, a mirror of politics, and many of the works in our collection are particularly connected to these issues. So, with this exhibition here, we focus on the ups and downs of modernism, on the bright and hopeful years, but also, and this is our main focus, on the setbacks, on the declines and exclusions, on the dark times of this period. So what I like to explain within the next minutes is that modern art and politics is not only an exhibition title. This bridge between art and society, art and politics, is something that really characterizes our collection and in a larger sense also our work at the National Gallery in Berlin. So let's go to the beginning. The history of our institution started in the late 19th century on the so-called Museum Island in the Spree River, located right in the center of Berlin. The National Gallery was opened in 1876, designed as a huge temple expressing leadership, power, and authority. What is special and almost unique about this National Gallery is that the museum was founded for 19th century art. Usually national galleries, when opened in the 19th century, were dedicated to old masters or to art from ancient or medieval times. But here in Berlin, the national mission was different. A major donation by a German banker brought a strong focus on 19th century art, for example, by Caspar David Friedrich, Friedrich Menzel, or Peter von Cornelius, of whom you see here some large paintings. So the National Gallery started as a house for relatively young German art, but it mainly owned works influenced by Romanticism and Biedermeier, which wasn't modern in the sense of new or stylistically revolutionary. Then, in the end of the 19th century, a big move was made by a new director to include French Impressionism. You see here the main gallery in an image with works by Edouard Manet, Auguste Renoir, and others. And this presentation was a success, but the conservatives in the country were shocked. And they stated that French art, and France was the enemy in the war of 1870-71, should not have a place in Germany's National Museum. And we still have today letters above the entrance of the museum. I think you can't see it here, but it's written at this place. Letters with dedication der deutschen Kunst to German art and the year 1871, which is the year of the founding of the German nation state. Kaiser Wilhelm, the emperor, insisted on taking the French paintings down in 1899. The national pride that dominated the facade also shaped the understanding of art and the purchasing program of this new gallery. At least works by German impressionists such as Max Liebermann, Lovis Corinth, and Max Levogt were allowed to acquire in the beginning of the 20th century, but there was very little scope for the inclusion of modern developments in art. Only in 1919, when the German Empire came to an end and the Weimar Republic was established, the next director, named Ludwig Justi, opened a so-called modern section of the National Gallery in another building, the Kronprinzenpalais. And with this move, we are now getting closer to the exhibition here. The Kronprinzenpalais was located even more downtown, directly at the main boulevard of Berlin. And here in the second floor, Ludwig Justi presented works by contemporary artists who were still very much in discussion. In just a few years, Justi built up a really top-class collection of classical modern art with mainly expressionist works, but also other avant-garde art movements such as Dadaism, New Objectivity, and Bauhaus abstraction were richly present in the Kronprinzenpalais. And here on the first picture, you see works by Franz Marc, Lionel Feininger and Max Pechstein. And on the second here, above, below, you see works by Willy Baumeister, Oskar Schlemmer, and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, or Rudolf Belling here with this triad, among others. The director called the space the Gallery of the Living, and this museum idea was completely new at the time. Almost no museum was showing young living artists. Justi presented these works in a very puristic hanging in front of white, neutral walls, and Alfred Barr, the later founding director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, saw this presentation in 1927 and later recalled that the visit had deeply inspired him and helped him developing the later MoMA. So, Berlin, the National Gallery, for a short moment became a role model for others in the world. But this avant-garde role of Berlin did not last very long. When the National Socialists gained power in 1933, they began to compel museums and art academies to conform with the party line. Anyone who was undesirable, either politically or in the sense of Nazi racial ideology, was forced out of office. Adolf Hitler spoke out against modernity in principle and across the board, so all avant-garde art movements were persecuted. The National Socialists used the term degenerate to defame all works of art that didn't fit their ideology. In addition, there were work and exhibition bans for Jewish and communist artists. But many avant-garde artists continued to work under these difficult conditions, either in secret in their homeland or in exile. And this is something you can see in this exhibition. We argue that modern art didn't come to an end in 1933. And I'm now showing you some examples of artworks in the exhibition which were created during the National Socialist dictatorship. One example is the painting by Kurt Querner, who was a communist artist. In 1933, he painted himself with a furious face and a nettle in his hand, which can be read as a symbol of resistance against the National Socialists, who just gained power. It is painted in the new objectivity style based on figurative representation, which was partially tolerated by the Nazis, and some artists could arrange their style with the regime. But you can also find these hidden social, critical, and political statements in some works. For the artists who remained in Germany after 1933, it took great courage to continue creating modern art under these repressive conditions. One example is Karl Grun's, who painted in secret Germany Awaken in 1942, inspired by a picture of Pablo Picasso's anti-war painting Guernica, purchased under the counter. Kuhn's picture can be read as an extremely resistant gesture at the time, a warning against the war. And the self-portrait by Max Beckmann was painted in the middle of the Second World War and under German occupation in his exile in Amsterdam. In 1933, he was dismissed from his professorship at the Städelschule in Frankfurt, and his expressionist art was defamed, so he left Germany to Amsterdam. In this portrait, he is showing himself in a melancholic thinker's pose. His body is framed by dark surfaces that make him seem almost imprisoned. So, the National Socialists tried to make modern art in Germany invisible, and many artists like Beckmann were forced into exile. In July 1937, a very fatal event took place when numerous artworks classified as degenerate were confiscated from German museums. Many of them were defamed a short time later in the vast exhibition Entartete Kunst, Degenerate Art in Munich as an expression of the decline of art, as the Nazis described it. And you see here some installation views of this exhibition, and you can see how disrespectful the artworks were placed, very close together. Some paintings were hung upside down, and there were slogans on the walls mocking the works on display. By 1941, this exhibition had toured cities across the country and had been seen by more than 3 million people. And you see here 3 masterworks which were confiscated from the National Gallery collection and shown in the Degenerate Art exhibition. Franz Marc and Louis Corinth on the image below, and Emil Nolde in the upper right image where you see it at the back, while the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels is visiting the exhibition in Berlin in 1938. And on this slide, you see 2 works by Rudolf Belling from our collection, which were confiscated and are visible at this installation view of the Degenerate Art exhibition. So you see them here and here, here and here. In the case of the artist Rudolf Belling, we can see that the criteria used for defining degenerate art were vague, and the various commissions charged with confiscation made arbitrary decisions. While Belling's Art Deco style, head and breadth, as well as his triad, were wrested from the National Gallery and defamed in the Degenerate Art exhibition, his naturalistic portrait of the world-famous boxer Max Schmeling was being shown at Munich's Haus der Deutschen Kunst, the House of German Art, in the first great German art exhibition, intended to demonstrate the National Socialist ideal of art, held at the same time a short distance away. So this paradoxical situation is exemplified also in our exhibition, in which we are displaying the head and breast as well as the boxer sculpture. In further purchase from August 1937 onwards, a total of about 20,000 artworks were removed from more than 100 German museums, and the National Gallery lost around 500 works. And what happened with these works later on? Many were sold abroad or exchanged for older art. On the other hand, what had not been classified as international exploitable was destroyed on a large scale. So let me tell you what happened with the confiscated works, which I just showed you as examples. In the case of the 2 Belling sculptures, we are happy that we got them back after the Second World War. The sculptures were seized in 1947 near Berlin on the property of an art dealer who was commissioned to sell confiscated artworks abroad, and they were handed over to the National Gallery in 1949. The painting by Nolde was sold in Switzerland and repurchased in 1999. But only nearly the half of the confiscated artworks came back to our collection. The painting by Corinth, for example, was sold to the Kunstmuseum Basel in Switzerland, and it is still there. These sales during the Nazi era were legal transactions, so after the war we had no right to reclaim our works. And the case of Franz Marc's Tower of Blue Horses is still a huge mystery. This painting, once the centerpiece of the Expressionist collection and very prominently displayed at the entrance to the exhibition at the Kronprinzenpalais, was confiscated and shown in the Degenerate Art exhibition in Munich, as we have seen. But as the artist was an officer in the First World War and the prominent painting was beloved by the German educated middle classes, it was a problem for Nazi propaganda, and so it was taken down again after a few days due to protests and taken to a storage in Berlin. And by the way, the other paintings by Franz Marc stayed in the exhibition, only the artist's name was removed. We know that Marc's Tower of the Blue Horses was selected for sale abroad on personal behalf of Hermann Göring, along with 12 other high-profile paintings of classical modernism. However, there is no evidence of a change of ownership. To this day, it is considered lost, along with 142 other works from the National Gallery. So in 1945, after the end of the war, the Kronprinzenpalais lay in ruins. The great National Gallery collection of classical modernism, established in the 1920s, was almost completely lost, destroyed by the degenerate art campaign. Some works that had been spared by the National Socialists had been moved to flag towers shortly before the end of the war, and others had remained in the undestroyed basement of the National Gallery on Museum Island. The National Socialists and the museums themselves had taken some works to mines outside Berlin, and these works were recovered by American troops later and moved to central collecting points. The Soviets transferred others to the Hermitage in Leningrad. It was not until the 1950s that the works that could still be found were returned to the National Gallery collection, which was then divided into two parts. Due to the Cold War and the division of Germany into East and West, also the National Gallery was splitted since 1949. And this aspect of history makes our collection also very unique. East Berlin and West Berlin became separated, in the early years only by ideological and dogmatic differences, because one side was oriented towards Russia and the other side towards the West and the United States. But when in 1961 the Berlin Wall was erected, every direct collaboration of curators between East and West was made impossible. In the East, the National Gallery had at least a building, the old museum of the National Gallery on the Museum Island, which I showed you earlier. But in the West, there was the need for an own building, and therefore, Mies van der Rohe was commissioned to build a new museum. The Neue Nationalgalerie, the new National Gallery, opened in 1968. And when it was built, the museum was located at the edge of what was then West Berlin. And you see here some images of the building when it was under construction. And what makes the museum such an icon of modern architecture is the pillar-free open space of the upper glass hall with its steel roof and gracefully austere architectural forms. The Neue Nationalgalerie is really an icon of modernism. The roof is supported by only 8 columns on the outside, and it was lifted into place using cranes, and the columns were afterwards placed underneath it. So this was really a spectacle at the time. On the images left below, you can see a bit more from the surrounding. The Neue Nationalgalerie was the second building constructed as one of the cornerstones of the Kulturforum, the Cultural Forum. You see the already finished Philharmonic Concert Hall in the back, constructed by Hans Scharoun, also a very famous architect. You see it here. And this church was damaged during the war, but already rebuilt at this time. And behind the church are today other museums. I mean this area. So the Gemäldegalerie is located there, the Gallery for Old Masters, the Kupferstich Cabinet, Museum of Prints and Drawings, and the Kunstgewerbemuseum, the Museum of Decorative Arts. The image right below was made at the roofing ceremony. So you see me sitting in the first row with a white coat here. And the Neue Nationalgalerie was the last major project completed by Mies. The architect died shortly after the building's inauguration. Here you see the splendid opening in 1968. For the Neue Nationalgalerie, of the Neue Nationalgalerie, and the visitors were dancing in the sculpture garden, and the museum opened with an exhibition on the Dutch modern painter Piet Mondrian in the hall. In the first 3 months, almost 500,000 visitors came, so the museum was a sensation in the late 60s. So from 1949 on, throughout many, many years, the National Gallery existed, two national galleries existed next to each other, just a couple of miles away, without any contact. Both had a mission to be museums for the 20th century, which means for modern art, but also for contemporary art. But they collected in very different ways according to the political systems of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic in the east, and the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, the Federal Republic of Germany in the west. In the authoritarian and socialist East, Germany, a figurative style modeled on the example of the Soviet Union's cultural ideology was propagated. There was a strong focus in the collection on realism, political imagery, and traditional sculpture. And in the democratic and capitalist-oriented West Germany, there was a stronger focus on post-war avant-garde, on abstraction, and later also on pop art, conceptual art, arte povera from Italy and from other contemporary art movements. And also different attempts were made to rebuild the modern art collection at the National Gallery. In the East, mainly figurative tendencies were acquired, and in the West, abstract tendencies. It was not until the reunification of the National Gallery collection in 1992 that it became possible to exhibit the development of modern art in Germany in its entirety again, and also in this exhibition here. So after the wall came down in 1989, not only two countries were reunified, also two museums became friends again. And in the early 90s, all curators from East and West met. The whole collection was merged and reorganized. The art of 19th century from both institutions, from East and West, was brought to the old building on the museum island, and all modern art, again from both sides, was presented at the Neue Nationalgalerie. And for the contemporary art, a new building was opened, the Hamburger Bahnhof. And this is the situation which you will find still today. 3 major buildings for the one large collection of the National Gallery, ranging from the art of the 19th century up to art of our time. A shared collection managed by 3 museums. But let's get back to our exhibition here. In regard to the modern art collection, the encounter of the 2 collections from East and West is really interesting. On the one hand, the differences of both collections couldn't be larger. On the other hand, however, there are surprising similarities. In both national galleries in the East and in the West, there was a strong interest in political works, in artists who focused on social issues, on urban life, on themes of everyday life. So there is a big red line which runs through our whole collection from the early days until our present time, and that is the strong focus on these political and social issues. And let me show, based on the works of this exhibition, how wonderful these collections match and complement each other. The work of Oskar Nährlinger, for instance, in which he focused on the life of the working class within a modern setting, this was acquired by the East. Ernst Wilhelm Neue became later a hero of the post-war West avant-garde, so the acquisition of this early work by him was purchased by the West. The painting by Konrad Felix Müller shows the communist politician Otto Rühle. It therefore perfectly fits to the Nationalgalerie East. The Sonja by Christian Schad, with its focus on a stylish nightlife culture with American cigarettes, champagne, was clearly an acquisition of the West. This painting by Alice Lex Nährlinger, a communist artist who tried to support the class struggle with her clearly political art since the 1920s, and who moved to the GDR after the war was an acquisition of the East. And in the East, however, there was more support for female artists. The Bauhaus teacher Vasily Kandinsky became part of the collection in the West, where abstraction was the direction to pursue. And the same applies for Willy Baumeister. And this clearly political theme by Karl Hofer, anticipating the horrors of World War II, was an acquisition of the East. So in the end, you see how rich, how diverse, how pluralistic our collection became by merging the two collections from East and West. And the strong focus on themes of society and politics is really the red line which runs through our collection in ways of the themes and figures which are depicted in the artworks, the biographies of the artists which were affected by political circumstances, or also the provenances of the artworks. And this connection to society and politics also makes our collection so different from collections in other German cities, so different also from collections in Paris, London, or, for example, Madrid. No other collection in Europe was so much shaped by the effects of the two world wars, of national socialist terror. The Cold War was so much shaped by the political climate. And Berlin as a city was always in the center of everything, and where the consequences of politics were immediately apparent for everybody. So for us in Berlin, the title Modern Art and Politics, as I hope you can understand now better, is much more than just a title. It is a program and part of our identity, being a national gallery with our specific history. We see art not so much as an isolated discipline, but much more as being part of a certain society, of a certain history and a certain culture. And this view is also present in our collection presentations at the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin. And at the moment we are showing a larger survey on art after 1945 under the title Extreme Tension, and again under the subtitle Art Between Politics and Society. And this exhibition focuses on the major conflicts and ideological confrontations between East and West, abstraction and figuration between traditional artistic genres and experimental new forms. And these developments in art are contextualized with the aftermath of the Holocaust and wartime destruction, the subsequent spirit of optimism, emancipation movements, and the Cold War. All of these events lead to tensions within society and fundamental realignments in the visual arts. And here you have a view into the first exhibition space with a juxtaposition of international abstract art featured in the 1950s by the West, and figurative art featured in the 1950s mostly by the East. And the exhibition gives a wide survey on developments until the late 1990s. So this exhibition is located in the basement of our building, in the collection rooms. And in the famous exhibition hall upstairs, we are showing our main special exhibitions. At the moment, you can see the first retrospective on Brazilian artist Ligia Clark in Germany, which is also my curatorial work, and it is the first solo exhibition in this space of a non-Western artist. So I'm very proud that we could realize it. And beside these shows, we have also exhibitions on Gerhard Richter and Yoko Ono in further rooms downstairs, and a fox sculpture by Fujiko Nakaya in our beautiful sculpture garden. And what are the upcoming projects we are already working on? In the upper glass hall, we will realize the installation The Clock by Christian Markley, which is a 24-hour video work. And afterwards, we will present a major exhibition of the modern sculptor Constantin Brancusi, which is a cooperation with the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And in the basement, we will open in autumn this year an exhibition on surrealist artist networks. And these are my last slides, my last pictures for today. Next to our building by Mies van der Rohe, we have a huge construction site for a new extension building. It will be double the size of the Mies building, and it will give us more space for the collection, but also for education, for digital media, for theater, and for performance, also for shops, restaurants, and bars. And the design is by Herzog and de Meuron, the famous architects from Switzerland. And the name of this building will be Berlin Modern. So with this overview of our current and upcoming projects, I come to an end with my lecture today. I hope I could give you an interesting insight into the history of our collection, and we are really very pleased to present a part of it here in Albuquerque. Thanks for your interest, for hearing my lecture and for visiting the show. And of course, I'm happy to answer any question you may have.
If you do have a question, please raise your hand so that I can bring the microphone so everybody can hear. Anybody? Anybody? Looks like everybody's ready to see the show. Oh, here's somebody. Okay, hold on.
I just have a question on how did you get interested in Brazilian art? I mean, I'm sorry, it's not.
This is a personal question. I studied with a great professor, and she was really a founder of post-colonial theory in art academies, and I'm very influenced by her, and so I decided to write my master thesis on a Brazilian artist, Ciro Meirelles, and afterwards I thought it's still so much to do to promote Latin American art in Germany and the Western world, and so I made my PhD in Brazilian art, which connected the modernist movement from the 20s with contemporary art.
Okay, give me a second to come up there.
So with the Brazilian Artist Exhibition, I'm interested in how is the museum proposing to go forward? Is it mainly focusing still on German modern and contemporary art, or is it looking and intending to look at and collect art from the wider world?
In our exhibition history, there is a great focus on male artists and also on art from North America and from Europe. And since a couple of years, we really try to change this, and we want to open up our view on art history, and we are showing at the moment much more female artists in the exhibition hall upstairs, and also we are showing art from all around the world. For example, this exhibition here at the Albuquerque Museum is in a sense a condensed version of an earlier exhibition presentation we had at the National Gallery in 21, which was called The Art of Society, and which I also co-curated together with my colleagues, and there I loaned works from other museums, from Brazil or from Africa, because we don't have these works in our collection. We have a very small budget to acquire new works, but it is really important to show, to explain that modern art was not a European phenomenon, but it was all around in the world.
Is there somebody over here? Okay.
can you tell us a little bit about the visionaries in the 1950s, 1960s who must have dedicated their lives to reclamation, unification, and re-identifying modern art of Germany? Who were these people who brought this about?
I mean, the first director of the National Gallery was Werner Haftmann, and he was an art historian. He wrote several books on abstraction, and he was one of the main figures, I would say, in post-war Germany who established abstraction as the new universal language. Yeah, I would say that from this point of view, from the National Gallery. And then we had this Dokumentas, which were very important shows in Germany, and these shows, huge group shows, international shows, were promoting abstract art mostly.
I have a question on the collection. I'm over here. I was actually really interested in learning about this exhibition, that the Neue Gallery didn't have a more significant collection of the Blue Rider. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, we once had a huge collection of the Blaue Reiter, but these works were mostly, all of them were confiscated. So it wasn't possible to rebuild this collection again after the Second World War. So we have just very few works. We have three works in this show: Gabriele Münter, Alexei von Jablensky, and Marianne von Werefkin, who were members of the Blue Rider group. But we don't have a Franz Marc now in our collection because it is lost.
I'm curious if the choice of beginning the exhibit in 1910 is related to Goebbels' executive order to start stripping museums of degenerate art. Is that why you chose 1910?
Actually, the oldest work in this exhibition is from 1909. It's a painting by Emil Nolde, and we just rounded the number up to 1910 because it sounds better, I would say. And also, we are starting with the avant-garde movements, and we are starting with expressionism in this exhibition. And the artist group Die Brücke, the bridge, was founded in 1905, and the Blue Rider was founded in 1911. So we don't show the really early modern art. So we decided to start with the expressionist artist group, and that's why we are around the date 1910.
I have a question about the development of interest in Pablo Picasso. I've read that Germany and Russia were far ahead of France and the United States in appreciating Picasso. Has your museum benefited from that?
Actually, I didn't understand your question. I'm sorry.
All right. I've been reading about the interest in Pablo Picasso in Germany and Russia that developed far ahead of France and the United States. Has your museum benefited from that?
I mean, formally, in the beginning of the 20th century, there was no interest in international art and acquiring international art. So the museum, as I said earlier in my presentation, was dedicated to German art. So the Picasso wasn't collected in the early, in the early 20s or 30s. So it came back later into the collection.
Were there hands up in here in the front somewhere? Okay, here.
I'm curious, as I listen to comments that people are making and responses, emotional responses to the wonderful exhibit. Thank you for your. How do different generations in Germany today, how do they respond to this particular exhibit and to these differences in art in those years that are shown here? How would you say different generations today in Germany respond?
I think we have, as a national museum, a huge responsibility to tell the history of Germany, especially the dark history of National Socialism, and we have a great education team in our museum, and we are inviting a lot of school classes and students to our collection presentations and to tell the history, and in my view it is well received, yes.
How did you choose Albuquerque to host the show?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
How did you choose Albuquerque to be one of the host cities for this show?
Why Albuquerque?
Yeah, why? Except for the red and green.
Actually, we hired an agency which is called Museum Box, and they help us to contact different museums in the United States and to ask if they are interested in taking the show. And we were not focused on a specific museum, but we wanted to curate a whole show, to show a larger part of our collection to a broader public in the United States. And now we are very happy that the Albuquerque Museum was interested in our concept, and we can show this exhibition here in New Mexico. So yeah, we are very pleased.
First, I'd like to thank you for such a wonderful exhibition and explanations. My question is, what's the relationship of how these cultural institutions get their funding and political support within Germany to be able to do what you're doing, and what kind of influence does the government have on the program, or is it independently done by the expert artists?
So we are a stage museum, so we are funded by the state, but we also need to ask for more money and to send our requests to foundations. And also we have a member circle, and they are supporting us with the acquisition of new works, for example, or they are also sponsoring whole exhibitions. Yeah, we are, I think Berlin at the time is very poor. They don't have much money to sponsor cultural things, but we are fine as a state museum, I would say, and we are also very free to decide what we want to show.
Related to that question, I was wondering if you all have experienced any criticism from far-right groups.
Criticism from?
The far-right groups in Germany for exhibits like this.
Critics from the right-wing parties?
Yes, from the far right. In the United States, there's been a question about
no.
critiques of museums and the presentation of the past. I wonder if anything like that is going on in Germany in the museums.
No, we are not attacked from these parties for our exhibitions and our program, and there's no, I would say, no reflection on our exhibitions at the moment.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the exhibit.